The following Conscious Consumer Network recording of a live broadcast is available to purchase in high definition at ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a CCN pledger. For €10 a month, you can have unlimited access to CCN high definition downloads at ethymarket.com. Ethymarket, the ethical marketplace for conscious consumers. Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
One, you're live.
Hello and good evening, everybody. I am the individual commonly known as Melvi, and this is Dragonology Season 2. So welcome to you. If you have tuned in from wherever in the world you may be, it is great to have you with us. Hopefully you have followed on Dragonology Season 1 and you kind of have a grasp of the information, because Season 2 is going to be a bit faster in pace. So for those of you who perhaps haven't been through Season 1, do yourselves a favor, go back and watch episodes 1 to 13. And for those of you who have, stick with us, because we're going to be picking up the speed a bit this season and definitely making headway into the world of Dragonology. So I guess just to be a little bit diligent, I suppose, for those who may perhaps be tuning in for the first time or perhaps have only seen a few episodes, I thought I'd give an idea straight down the line, as to what Dragonology is. And it's a lot of different things, because it can't really be defined by sort of one little, pardon me, I'm about to cough. It can't really be defined by sort of one subject or one little box or one little label. Dragonology really is quite a unique subject in the way that we've gone about approaching things. You taught certain subjects in school, and you learn, like, for example, certain things would fall under the subject of geography, or certain areas of study would fall under the subject of history. Well, this kind of is an all-encompassing subject that deals with so many relative and relevant issues pertaining to our time, what is going on, personal journeys, the emancipation of humanity. And all of it ultimately is about discovering who we are, where we've come from, and the real story of our history. And so intrinsically, Dragonology encompasses all of that. And it's kind of been interesting to see how people responded to Season 1, because I've had a lot of people come to me with many different descriptions of how they thought Dragonology fitted into the language that they understood. And I thought I'd share a few of those labels, and I'll give you the one that's mine at the end. But this is how it has been described to me by various other people. I've had one of our other broadcasters compare this course in Dragonology to a postgraduate level course in cultural anthropology. I've had someone else say to me it's like a neurolinguistics deprogramming course. Not neurolinguistic programming, but deprogramming. Another person has said to me it's an investigation into our hidden history, which is obvious. Very obviously, it's an exploration of the dragon cult, as stated in the introduction. One could say it's a deconstruction of language, symbolism, myth, and fairy tale to the origins of those things, to find out what they really are, which, funny enough, has a common origin with our true history. So, myth and fairy tale shouldn't be dismissed. But I'd say more relative to our reality, and why it is so important to study the subject of Dragonology is it is an attempt to find clues as to the truth about the nature of our reality. So hopefully, if you haven't watched this before, I've got you a little bit intrigued, enough to stick with us through the rest of this episode, if not the rest of the series. Okay, so let's define a few things, some of the basics. What is reality? Okay, much like the realms of things like that which is legendary or mythological, there is no widely agreed upon application for the word reality. In fact, reality can be seen as somewhat relative to, people's experiences, lessons learned, and also the way we process things through our various perception filters. But there is one thing that is definitely very constant, and that the way in which we've been programmed is completely artificial. And we've been programmed into an artificial construct.
And this has been done because our entire reality, or that which is real, reality, real being the first part of reality, that which is real has been twisted. So what we think is real is actually an illusion. And what is real is hidden away from us. Okay? And therefore our entire reality is an elaborate manipulation. It's all being manipulated. And Philip K. Dick, a wonderful author, some people said he was crazy, but he has come up with some pretty profound statements stating that reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, does not go away. And he's also explained how reality is manipulated, and he states that the basic tool for the manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use those words. So it's all about words and language. If you think about this, even when you're not speaking or reading, perhaps just thinking in your head, you're thinking your thoughts in words. Sometimes you think out loud and you speak. What are you speaking? Words. You're not speaking a language you don't know in order to describe the thoughts in your head. Everything is conceptualized and conscientized through series of words, which are themselves just symbolic representatives strung together into sentences. So how do we untangle ourselves from a manipulated reality? Well, words and language hold humanity in a conceptual construct and framework that is distinctly dragon-like in nature. And we'll go on to prove this. If you guys haven't been watching series 1, it's very obvious to prove that words and language find the origin with the dragon. And this is how the dragons have controlled us, is through words and language. By learning the true meaning of words and language through a study of etymology, synonyms, homonyms, rhymes, and symbolism, we are able to decipher our deception for ourselves. Incidentally, the words decipher and deception come from the same group of words. No coincidence. So we can decipher our deception as well as ascertain a clear indication as to who our controllers are and who and what they have been in recorded history. Where they have been largely been masked through the mode and application of symbolic representatives to mask the true nature and identity of the dragon. So, in case you didn't know, dragons are real. They do or have existed. Dragons are not just mythological creatures relegated to the realms of semi-dismissive fairy tale. They were and are, in fact, creatures that exist and have distinctive non-human features and abilities. And please don't believe me, do your own research. Dragons are absolutely everywhere. In fact, I dare you to walk into find me a Chinese restaurant that doesn't have a dragon somewhere represented in it. I've not yet found one. And of course, this representation we've got over here is one representational version of what the dragons were represented like. And this is a Babylonian representation. But we've got various representations through time that all give a different indication and a different story as to what we were taught about these things and who they were and how cultures perceived them. And you know why they chose to preserve them and carve them in stone like this. Anyway, the dragons control us through language whilst masking themselves behind symbolism. And some of the most common symbols of the dragon are, of course, snakes and serpents, as we see here. This is an ancient Egyptian papyrus. And you can see this is legs of a human, arms of a human with a body of a serpent. Okay, so this is also what I would say would be a dragon representation, because obviously this being has wings. So any being with horns, wings, that has a body of a snake or scales, any non-human features like that, and sometimes they're often anthropomorphized or metamorphized into other creatures. So it's not necessarily just a representation with wings or horns, but you'll start to notice things like the goat comes in because it has horns. And if you've been through Dragonology Season 1, you'll have a clear understanding of that. All right, symbolism. A symbol is a thing conventionally regarded as typifying, representing, or recalling something, especially an idea or quality. It may be a mark or character taken as a conventional sign of some object, idea, function, or process. The purpose and application of a symbol is to substitute an object with its symbolic counterpart. Adoption and use of symbols is universal to all cultures and is primarily used as a mechanism of subterfuge in order to mask the existence of the dragon, whilst covertly worshipping it with symbolic expression. Now, a good example, of course, is the symbol of the heart, as shown over here. And it can be an organ in the body, but can also be a representation of love, passion, or romance. So a heart, for example, would be a symbol. And much like the heart is a symbol, language is composed of numerous symbolic expressions. For example, just the basic alphabet. Each individual character in the alphabet is a symbol in its own right. All language comprises of multi-layered symbolic expression, from individual characters to syllable groupings to much more occult meanings. Okay, and it says over here, language, system of conventional spoken or written symbols used by the people in a shared culture to communicate with each other. But so what is interesting to notice is that across a lot of these different cultures, you start seeing the same symbols because actually they all represent very much the same principle. And to give you an idea of like sort of the multi-layering of symbols, I should say, most people obviously don't know that the letter A, which is alpha, the first letter of the alphabet, is actually the representing symbol of this iconography, which is the all-seeing eye on the capstone, but it's raised. That is what it's meant to represent. All right. See, we're so taken in by that section here, but what we're not noticing is the open section, which is really the important bit, and that is being represented over there. It's all about distraction, you see. Anyway, I'm not going to go through all of this. For those who have been following Season 1, this will be familiar to you. And this is an example, or what I should call a tablet of listings of dragon and serpentine root words or word roots. And various words compose of these roots. You'll find a lot of words in the various languages composing of these roots. And all these roots ultimately allude back to the dragon within our language, hidden into our language. And we're going to go through a few of those tonight. But some of the most obvious ones that we always bring, I suppose, attention to, because it's important to know, is, of course, the OR is the most common root. And tonight we'll be dealing with the OPH, Offy. Okay? And you can kind of see that goes on into each other. The PHA goes into Fanes, and then into Fairy, Fury. And we'll get on to this a bit more. So much like there are, as we say, symbols within language that actually represent other things, like, for example, Offy represents a serpent, or Kula represents a serpent, or, for example, Dracula represents a serpent, a vampire. Individual little root words represent something else and alludes to the dragon. Although most of us don't think of it as the dragon, it's very obvious as to what, for example, Dracula was when you start dissecting the etymology of his name. But what is very interesting is to look at how symbolism has evolved over time in language. And when I lived in London, this was something I came across quite often, was something called Cockney rhyming slang. And you heard this quite a bit on things like EastEnders, or, sort of the very British programs on TV. And they used like rhymes to mask what they would actually be saying. For example, people would say, let's have a butcher's. And you go, let's have a butcher's. Now, when I arrived in London, I was saying, what do you mean, let's have a butcher's? What they're actually saying is, let's have a look. Because what look rhymes with is hook. And what they would actually be saying is, let's have a butcher's hook. In other words, let's have a look. Another example of this is, I'm going up the apples and pears. And, if you don't understand it, you're going, what? You're going up the apples and pears? But what it means is, I'm going up the stairs. The stairs and pears rhyme with each other. Or, I don't Adam and Eve it. In other words, I don't believe it. Okay, Adam and Eve it. Basically, I don't believe it. You should always agree with your trouble and strife, which is quite funny. But trouble and strife, obviously, being a replacement for wife. And going to bring around the Salvador Dali. I won't even tell you what that one was. But when we were living in London, we used to call people up to come and deliver the Salvador Dali. And if anyone can work that out, you can let me know. Anyway, slang. Just wanted to point this out here. Cockney rhyming slang. Very commonly known in England. These are very good indications of them. So slang. My mother always told me that slang means sloppy language. Okay, slang. And I found this over here. What is slang? Slang is informal language as opposed to standard English. Slang, like other types of language, change over time. Some words which were originally slang are now part of standard English. So maybe people from long, long ago look at our language now and go, oh, it's slang. And like we look at the kids of today and we hear them get a street talk and we go, oh, that's slang. But really what it is language being evolved through symbolic representatives that, perhaps change from generation to generation. And perhaps what might be slang to me might be standard language to some teenage kid in high school because that's how they all talk. And that's fair enough. But there is still that concept of slang being a symbolic representation of something else. Okay? And I bring you back to this again. Let's have a butcher's is a symbolic representation of let's have a look. Okay, so there's various ways in which slang has evolved in different cultures, and people have got different colloquial terms for different things within various cultures. But what is interesting to notice is this word slang, which, as I said, my mom always told me slang, don't use slang, you've got to speak eloquently. She always thought it was very important that I spoke well. But she used to say that slang stands for sloppy language, which makes perfect sense to me until you start looking deeper into the meaning of slang. And slang or slung is the Dutch word for snake. And you don't say slang in Dutch, you say slung with a U sound, not an ah, but an ah sound. So you go slung. Slung is the Dutch word for snake, and in fact the Afrikaans word for snake. From the word slang is the root word lang, which forms the root word of language, which we've already spoken about, okay? But this is interesting. Lang is pronounced lang, all right? Like your breathing lung, okay? So lang, all right, is the Dutch word for long. When you say the street is long, yes, you would say something like die straat is baie lang, which means the street is very long. So what is interesting to note about this is that actually is this word here, lang, which, as we've spoken about here, is the root of slang, and the root of language is the Dutch word for long, which is the English long, okay, as in a long piece of string, or my hair is long and needs a haircut, or whatever. So that is the Dutch word for long. And this is important because, and I'll give you an example. In Dutch, you'd say, die slang is lang. And in English, you'd say, the snake is long. All right, take a look at that. In Dutch, you say, die slang is lang. English, you'd say, the snake is long. Now, here's the real kicker, okay? in the Chinese culture, which is synonymous with dragons, all right, the Chinese dragons are called what? The Long. And you even pronounce it the same way as this, Lang, all right, with a U sound, Lang, not Lang or Long with a O. You pronounce it the same freaking way, which is Lang, all right, as in the air in your lungs. That is how that word is said, sometimes with one O, sometimes two. But the Chinese dragons are known as the Lung. And that cannot be a coincidence, because this word here is the same as this word, right? Which is the root word of slang and language. All right. And slang is the Dutch word for snake. So just to take you back through that again, and from slang is the root word language. Okay. And then, of course, lang, which is the Dutch word for long. And of course, long is, or lung, I should say, are the Chinese dragons. It's what the Chinese call the dragons. They call them the lung. It's unreal. It all just goes back on each other. Anyway, another example of just how interwoven this tapestry of dragons and language is. In fact, the dragons absolutely created our language and divided us through it, much like they did through imposing laws and religions onto us, which has divided humanity and caused many wars. The Latin word, of course, for dragon being angui, and you can Google translate this, put dragon in, and you get the word angui back. And angui, of course, is the root of anguish, the English word anguish, anger, and angel. For those who watch Dragonology, this isn't new, just doing a bit of revision. We are going somewhere with this. So again, much like the word slang, referencing a symbolic way to talk about English, represents a serpent in other language, the word slang being a snake in Dutch. So we have the same situation here. The Dutch word for angel is engel, and the Dutch word for English is engels. So again, as we know, angels are dragons. If you haven't watched Dragonology 1, go check it out. But angels and dragons are very much the same thing. So what we're saying basically is the same thing here, is that the language comes from the angels or the dragons. Very much seen because in Dutch, the word for angel is the same as the word for English. Now, I beg your pardon. Angels and dragons are very much the same creatures. Very much indeed. Cannot be denied. The evidence is there. Funny enough, I was interviewed by Dr. Rima LeBeau on her show that she hosts on Conscious Consumer Network on Monday. And although she doesn't know much about dragons, she's had some interesting anecdotal experiences, which she spoke about. But the very last comment she made was, she said that although she didn't know much about them, she said that dragons have a reputation for being able to put a glamour on things. And I thought, wow, that's very telling. That someone who isn't studied on dragons actually has picked up on that. And that is common knowledge, that is their nature, that they like to put a glamour on things. Like, yeah, they do. They make themselves look all sweet and angelic when really they're demonic. And that's the whole paradox, is that angels are dragons, angels are demons, demons are angels. It's the same thing. Anyway, another example of what we've been talking about, how dragons are intricately interwoven into the creation of our language, is through the term Ifrit. Now, an Ifrit is an enormous winged creature of fire and lives in societies complete with kings and tribal clans and structures and stuff. And it's the same here. All the demons and all the angels have hierarchies and whatnot in their various realms. But these creatures are quite prevalent in Arabic mythology. They're known as a classification of jinn, which we've been through what the jinn are, and we will go into it again at some stage. But basically, the root word rit is the most important thing in these creatures' sort of wording, which gives you indication of to what they're really all about. Rit, okay? So just wants to point something out here. The F and the V are pretty much the same letter. Okay. For example, in the Dutch language, the V sound is said like an F sound. All right. There is no, the V is actually in Dutch is actually a W. So, for example, I always use the example of Volkswagen, all right, which is, most people would say Volkswagen, but it's actually Volkswagen, all right, because the V is pronounced as an F in the Germanic and Dutch languages. So V and F are literally the same word. So the Ifrit, which we spoke about here, which are these sort of dragon demon-like creatures that come up in Arabic mythology, is similar to this word Ivrit, which we'll get into in a second. Now, I want you to bring attention to the Rit root, which turns up in right, okay, as in your human rights or your right hand, for example. Right as in rite of passage, or you give someone their last rites. And, of course, ritual. And, of course, evolving word connections from right and ritual. You've got right, as we've already spoken about, but then you get bright, which alludes onto the most other common dragon theme, which is that of bright light shining, light bearer, Lucifer, all of that. So it's an evolution of language here into bright, light, and then you got LIT here, literature. Here we're back into the language, reading and writing again. So it always comes back full circle. You cannot escape it. So from writ, you come down to literature, from lit, and that evolved naturally through the word structure. Now back to the Ivrit again, as we spoke about. The word Ivrit, which is etymologically cognizant with Ifrit, remember that F and the V are virtually the same character, all right? Right and ritual. So Ivrit is etymologically cognizant with Ifrit, right, and ritual. What is Ivrit? Ivrit is the Hebrew language, all right? When you speak to a Hebrew person or Jewish person about learning Hebrew, they'll talk about learning Ivrit, all right? So it's not just any language we're talking about being named after winged demonic or angelic entities, all right? We've got the English language, we've got the Hebrew language, hell, we've even got what we call slang. And it's not a coincidence that all these words, Ivrit, meaning the Hebrew language, English, coming from the angels, and slang, meaning snake. And then we start breaking that word down. Very interesting stuff, all intricately interwoven into the tapestry that creates our reality. Who controls our reality matrix? Those who created and control the language. And who creates and control the language? Well, we just need to look at the names of the language to understand who they are. The evidence is all there. Okay, so apart from writing words and language, we also speak words and language. This is very interesting because this gets into some interesting territory. In French, the word for to speak is parler, all right? Parler. We've spoken about this one before. You know, when you get caught on a pirate ship, you declare the law of parler, which means you get the right to speak to the captain before they make you walk the plank or cut your head off or, you know, feed you to whatever. But the word parler is etymologically cognizant with both the Dutch and English words for pearl, all right? And pearl is symbolic of word. That is what pearl actually is, word. So what parler here is to speak, okay? And in allegory, pearl is symbolic of a word. Think about this, pearls of wisdom. What are you talking about? I was imparted with some pearls of wisdom. We're talking about I was imparted with words of wisdom, all right? If you look at these well-known sort of sayings that we have, it's all there. Pearls, in that term, pearls of wisdom, represents the word words. You were imparted with words of wisdom. And what's interesting to note is that parler is very similar to both the Dutch and English spellings for pearl. Here we've got parel, and that's very similar to parler. You just had to put the E on the end, and then you've got parler. And here as well, same thing. You just had to move the E to the end, and you got parler, all right? And of course, pearls and dragons are inextricably linked. You just cannot get around this factor. You always see dragons clutching claws. Often you see them standing on a ball or chasing after pearls, or there's a Chinese legend about the dragon pearls. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Pearls and balls, they seem to be obsessed with these orbs, always chasing them. You can see how this dragon's going after this ball, both of them facing towards the ball going up. And this is not just any dragon depiction. This is the 9-dragon wall in the Imperial Palace in China in the garden. And there's actually 9 orbs here, one for each dragon. You just got to have a look and see if you can find them. There are apparently 9 races of dragon, 9 races of lung, who seeded the emperors and races of the world, supposedly. And they represented here that the different color dragons obviously represent different races of dragons. And of course, back to the word parlay again. Parlay, of course, forms the root of parliament, all right? And parlay obviously comes from the serpent root word pala. We speak a lot about the serpent root triad, 3 that we group together, which is pala, para, and pio, all right? Pala obviously being the Sanskrit word for king, which is interesting to note. So the Pala root obviously is the root of palace, which is where kings live. And we start to get into the sort of the proof. Some of this is going to be covered territory for people who've been through this, but we are going to be pointing out even more evidence that ties into this in just a second. So bear with us if this is old news to you. Anyway, the basilisk means the king of serpents. And the Greek word basileus means king or ruler. The words basileus and basilisk are very, very similar. Okay, and they cannot be ignored just how similar they are. And that's for a reason. And it's not by coincidence, because this happens in so many languages that we have this similarity going on. For example, the term Kaiser, also referencing a ruler, an emperor, king, or whatever, just another fancy word for it. We've been through this, the Kai or Ka, Kar term. We went through it intensively in the last series of Dragonology. But Ka is king or angel, or Kai from the stars. Sir, okay, serpent or Tsar, as in that's not Sir or Tsar, if it's Kaisar, right? Zari, angel, alien or foreigner. Zao, light. Soros, which Zao or Sao, which is the root of Soros, which is the Latin for lizard. In Hebrew, Zohar, shine, or Zora, meaning Venus. Okay, that's the Hebrew representatives. So there's why I brought these in here is because that's what these words have evolved into as well. And I've gone through this intensively in other dragonologies, but just to give you an idea of what the various syllables of Kaiser, where they're rooted, clearly, is very interesting. And then, of course, Kaiser is an evolution of Caesar. And Caesar is the title given to the ruler of Rome. And the emperor or the Caesar is actually much higher than a king. I don't know if anybody knows that, but Emperor Caesar is far higher than a king. Kings are quite low ranking compared to them. So the Caesar is a title given to the ruler of Rome and originates with Kaiser. Now, emperor. Emperor is an interesting word because emperor contains 2 distinct dragon etymological roots. People can argue that it's 2 or 1, depending on how you want to do it. There is a word called Peor, which would be P-E-O-R. So you could even take that R off there and put the O-R on the end of there. It would be the serpent word Peor. We've even got a deity called Baal Peor, spelled that exact same way. Peor is a very common serpent root. But this seems to have 2, because you can actually even use just the plain P-E-R as one serpent root, very commonly, and also the O-R, which is the most common serpent root. So you've got per or in emperor, all right? So 2 dragon roots, because the emperor is much higher than the king. So it can't just be 1 dragon root, it must be 2. Always said the more dragon roots are in a word, the more important it is. All right, monarch. The word monarch contains the dragon root word arch or arch, which, of course, if you've been following the last series, you'll understand why that forms the importance when you look at architecture, but also in terms of the arch is commonly prefixed to angel, right? We spoke about angel earlier, as an archangel, referencing an angel of high rank. Now, again, indication as to the fact that they have hierarchy in the ranks of angels and demons. And of course, that spills over into our world. The Sultan. All right, the Sultan. The Sultan, the role of the Sultan is that of high king or ruler. Okay. And the word Sultan is etymologically cognizant with Satan. Yeah. You've got the assonance markers. Look, S-T-N. S-T-N. As you said, always the vowel sounds can translate or transliterate with each other. So, yes, we are ruled by the dragon. The words Sultan and Satan are etymologically cognizant with Shilton, meaning government, S-T-N, same assonance markers. And this theme plays out again in the Greek word diabolos. And diabolos is quite commonly known as the Greek version of the devil, the devil, diabolos. Diabolos or diabolus operates on the decipherable pun dia bull, meaning through the Senate. Okay, so that means dia, and in Dutch it would be duur, which means through, and boule, meaning the Senate. Now, what's interesting is a little sidestep here is that the word boule, actually government, is the root of the word bully, funny enough. And that is how people who were colonized saw the white colonialists coming, so particularly the darker skinned races. They were the ones who coined the word bula, and that's, you find that in both the Zulu and the Indonesian languages, that they refer to the big white sort of governing colonial powers. They called them bula, which is the root of the word bully, interestingly enough. Anyway, etymologically cognizant, the word bulle and bull with Baal and, of course, ball. We talked about pearls and balls. Dragons are obsessed with them. The god Baal is also known as Moloch. All right, we know the god Moloch. Lots of child sacrifices are made to him, often depicted as a bull god. All right, bull, here again. So Moloch is etymologically cognizant with Melach, all right, which basically Melach is an angel or messenger, all right, and Melech, which Melech is a king or ruler. And just before I carry on there, again, what I'm just pointing out here is how all these things tie in together, how you always have the references to these dragon, bull, angelic, demon, godlike beings, the words being similar to those of the kings and rulers, which are people that are on our planet that we know commonly in our world. No coincidence. No coincidence that is, by the way. Anyway, ball sport is ritual. Been through this before, but in case you don't know about this, competition and sport, particularly ball sports, are all rooted in ritual and are in fact covert ritualistic practices in honor of dragon gods or rulers. And this is a fact because you just have to, for example, football was invented by Freemasons, and you just have to look at the numbers in baseball to see how interesting those numbers tie in with the occult mysteries. In fact, all ball sport is ritual, and the Olympics, being the first sort of competition in sport, was in fact a religious ceremony dedicated to the god Zeus. Fact: government is an agency of the devil, ruled by the angelic dragon bloodline, which is epitomized through war and division. The division of man has happened via the mode and application of language, religion, and contract. We'll get into this now. This gets interesting. And pardon everyone for sticking through if you watch the previous Dragonologies, because I've been giving you sort of a bit of an intro up to now, because this is where we start getting into the heavy stuff in season 2. I start dissecting contracts and law and looking at it through the context of Dragonology, which becomes very interesting. But here we start with the contract. the element of the contract. Now, this is going to be a reoccurring theme, contract and conflict. So take note as one of our launching points for the series. Contract and conflict. The nature of contract or the covenant is one of conflict, all right? The contract that they have, okay, is very destructive, that our rulers have upon humanity. That's why we have all the wars, all right? Likened to an invading force, the angels or dragons are connected to the creation of man and the destruction of earth. In fact, in Greek, this annihilation is described as kataklysmos, which translates as cataclysm. And klumos, in fact, means flood, which perhaps gives indication that they had something to do with those cataclysmic floods, which we read about in the Enuma Elish, as well as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Epic of Noah in Genesis. So, as I was saying about competition and sport all being rooted with ritual and dragon worship, this is ever more evident when you start to look at the theme of opposition between the race of dragon and man. And this theme of race is very important, okay? When you talk about race, you talk about someone's this race or that race, okay? Although, yes, it is an interesting word because race can mean a bloodline. A race can mean like you run a race. So that's not by accident that that word has two meanings. And it gives you clues. Those two meanings give you clues as to the theme of the opposition between dragon and man. Because this theme of race having those two meanings is recorded in the Greek etymology of gonos, meaning to race, and agon, meaning a contest. Gon is what we're looking at here. And gon obviously being the root of dragon, all right? And gon obviously comes from gen, from generation, genesis, genes, to, again, genes, genetics, which comes from jinn, and then the jinn, which is malevolent dragons or demons or angels, whatever you want to call them. So this is respectively represented in English as, for example, we're speaking about here, race as a contest or race as bloodline, all right? So here the gon is represented as race as bloodline, and here in its forms of gonos and agon, it's represented as a race or contest. But the same root appears, all right? So very interesting. This for me is, if you can get your head around this for me is the clearest indication that there has always been a theme of opposition between gods and man, the dragons and men, rulers and men, a theme of destruction and conflict, and annihilation of our rights and many other things. In fact, we are a slave species. Humanity has been created as a slave species by an advanced race. There's huge amounts of evidence that exists that we have been heavily genetically manipulated, most likely with the original intent to mine for gold, but we later have become a slave species of the dragon and the secret governments and the priesthoods who manipulate humanity in order that we may never realize the truth about the nature of our reality and just how dragon-like in nature the Matrix really is. And I found more proof of this when you start looking at the gold element, okay? One of the things you can't separate the origins of humanity from is the worship of the serpent, the practice of slavery, and the seeking out of gold, the obsession with gold. The offering, beg your pardon, the offering of gold to the dragon gods is evident in the use of the old Hebrew word offer, okay, which references gold. Offer obviously has the serpent root word ophi in it. Offer is phonetically the same word as this, offer, indicative of an offering, like a sacrificial offering, or I'll offer you a peppermint, or for example. But what you have in this particular word for gold, which is the Hebrew word for gold, is the serpent root word, ophi. It can't be by coincidence. Could it be because they created us as a slave species to mine for gold? The evidence does seem to point that way. Anyway, the word Ophir, meaning gold, is cognizant with Aphor, meaning viper. Even Aphor and viper are not unlike each other. And I've drawn the similarity previously in other episodes. But Ophir and Aphor are not unlike each other. And we've used this word quite a bit before because Aphor evolves into Eve, if you guys remember. Sacrifice. The practice of offerings made the practice of offerings made to the dragons, gods, or rulers can take the form of sacrificial offerings or burnt offerings known as Holocaust. Pardon me, that's my cat, King Princess. Basically, the whole premise of these beings, gods, dragons, whatever you want to call them, is sacrifice. It is using our energetic, energetic manipulation, getting us to surrender our free will, our sacred labor. Even people sacrifice their children, and we'll get a bit more into this. But you just have to go into the Bible and have a look at how many references there are to burnt offerings. And in fact, the word for burnt offering is holocausta, which isn't that what they called what they did to in World War II to all those people in Europe, the Jews and gypsies and stuff that they killed in the concentration camps? It was called a Holocaust because, let's face it, the people that Hitler and them were actually in service to, all right, being the Vatican and the Jesuits, okay, all worship these guys, which are the dragons, the angels, the devils, whatever you want to call them. Went through this in the last episodes of season 1, but just a refresher for you guys, that the concepts or the symbols of the boat or the ship or ferry, which is similar to, fairy with wings, and that's not by coincidence, that those words are etymologically cognizant or very similar, is because the symbol of a boat, ship, or ferry is representative of the royal angelic dragon bloodline. And you see a lot of this, particularly in ancient Egyptian art, heavenly boats, boats in the sky, looking like this. Normally, they've got all the gods on here. You've got Horus and you've got Osiris over here. So this looks like Amun, because Amun-Ra normally had this big hat on. So you've got all the gods on a sky boat. This is represented obviously on papyrus. Very, very interesting. But it's not only a sort of thing that turns up in artwork and represents the royal dragon bloodline. The ship or the boat or the ferry is also a symbol of the contract. And as we say, contract and conflict. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the contract and the conflict, okay? But it's the boat, ship, or ferry is a symbol of the contract or covenant of dominion over man, which is indicated by words such as kingship, all right? Lordship, worship, membership. Even the word religion comes from the word religare, which means to moor or bind, like you would moor a boat, to tie fast or to have hold of. So, yeah, that's the contract. You tie people into a contract. What's interesting about the word contract is you talk about contracting a flu. You don't agree to consensually get that flu. You contract a flu. Think about that. Contract is conflict. It's not done by consent necessarily, because the whole premise of contract is always to initiate conflict. So we're talking about the boats being symbols of angelic dragon bloodline. And of course, it's no different when you start looking at where they turn up interestingly and prominently through various stories. The biblical story of Noah is a clear indication of how the boat or the ark, similar to arch, which is a dragon root word, is used to represent the royal angelic dragon bloodline. And clues in the film Noah, if you haven't seen it, do check it out with Russell Crowe. He doesn't do a half bad job of it. The dragon serpentine bloodline referenced in this film, the film of Noah, and it's referenced by passing of a snake skin, which gets wrapped around the arm. If I remember correctly, they slipped the top of it over a finger and then wrapped it around the arm. And this particular picture shows Lamech passing on the snake skin, sorry, pardon the spelling, passing on the snake skin to Noah, who then passed it on to his son at the end of the film. So what you're looking at here is representative of passing down the dragon bloodline, right? Very symbolic, the wrapping the snake skin around the arm, and then this is passed from one son to the next, intergenerational, very interesting. Okay, and again, as if the boat wasn't enough to show who Noah was because of the symbol that the boats and ships represent, then very much this particular wrapping of the snake skin around the arm is very symbolically representative. Now, much like a boat is symbolic of the royal dragon bloodline, so is the manger, all right? The fact that Jesus was said to have been placed in a manger alludes to the fact that Jesus was, in fact, of the royal angelic dragon bloodline. The word manger is cognizant with the European root mander, which is the root of commander, all right? So ruler, commander, same sort of king, the king commands and rules. That language all fits together, same theming. All right. Now, the other theme, much like the boat, ship, ferry, or manger, the basket also represents the angelic royal dragon bloodline. We think about the story of Moses being placed in a basket and floated down the river and found by the pharaohs. Moses was, in fact, Pharaoh Thutmose III. Provable fact. Do your research. So he was royalty if he was a pharaoh. And in fact, in the name Pharaoh, you've got the para root, P-A-R-A, the para root. So, yeah, and also the word Moses fits into Thutmose. Yeah. Very interesting. So, baskets, offering, and sacrifice. Sacrificial offerings were often made to the gods, dragons, or rulers, and they were often made in baskets. Baskets, of course, very symbolic, much like the manger, much like the boat, vessel for carrying. A sacrifice of the first fruits of spring were offered to the gods in a basket called a teen, T-E-N-E. This offering is symbolic of sacrificing of the firstborn child. Okay, so there's a lot of this theme of the firstborn children being sacrificed in various points in the Bible. And often this is tradition. When the springtime comes, the first fruits are collected and offered to the gods, either in atonement or as a thank you for the good harvest. So what's interesting is the purpose of sacrificial offering is to make the gods or dragons manifest and to please the gods. And this is a Greek character of a human sacrifice. I mean, this stuff has been going on forever. In every culture across the world, you'll find human sacrifice to the gods going on. It's a very specific thing. I mean, you don't just find people hacking each other for sacrifices on the roads every day. No, this is a very specific, very sacred ceremony. And in fact, whole campaigns of war are composed in order to have mass sacrificial rituals to these dragon gods. That's what they want. They want war. But what's interesting to note, and I'm just going to go back here, is to this, what we talked about here, a sacrifice of the first fruits. First fruits, we're going to focus on that, okay? Because we've been through this quite a bit in the last series of Dragonology, and that is that fruits and plants are just littered with dragon etymology. In fact, I all the fruits and things that I eat, the most commonly available fruits all have serpent root words in them. And I'm not going to go through them all now. In fact, you should go back and watch the last series and check it all out, because every single word here, apple, pear, grape, orange, banana, peach, lychee, avocado, tree, plant, green, orchard, lily, orchid, grove, forest, and floral are all rooted in dragon etymology. They all have dragon root words making up these particular words. Okay, fruits is a huge thing. You think about forbidden fruits in the Garden of Eden. Why is fruit so important? Okay, now this gets interesting, because remember the fruit, the basket of fruits, okay, over here, a sacrifice of the first fruits were offered to the gods in a basket called a teen, right? So we're looking at this basket here of fruits, a teen. Let's have a look at this. The basket known as a teen, which bears the first fruits for offering, is cognizant with the number 10. Well, of course it is. It's got 10 over there, which is indicative of the 10% of income traditionally given to the church. We're talking about tithes, all right? Tithes, obviously, being 10. That tithes is supposed to be a word for 10 or 10%. And tithes and offering. Honor the Lord with your capital and sufficiency, and with the first fruits of all your income. Can't believe it. It's there. First fruits from Proverbs 3:9. Okay? So it's all in the Bible. It's telling you sacrifice, taxes, the harnessing of our energetic currency, enslavement, vampiring off us through taxation. This is part of the covenant, the contract that we talk about, that I will go on to talk about. Taxation, okay? The concept of taxation is nothing more than ritual offerings of the fruits of your sacred labor. Take that in, folks. That is important. That's an important concept to get your head around, okay? And go back and watch what I've just been explaining to you to understand how this all ties in ritualistically, all right? Taxation is ritual offering, all right? It's been put into the syntagma, the contract, from the very beginning to harness our energetic potential. Anyway, why so much fruit allegory? And this gets interesting because it is a hell of a lot of fruit allegory, all right, where you talk about the first fruits here of your income, and of course all of these dragon etymology being the root of so many different fruit. So interesting. Why so much fruit allegory? Well, in Old Arabic, there are no words for good and bad. The closest term is ripe and unripe, okay? Unripe being the equivalent of evil, and unripe being represented as green. Of course, that's an unripe banana. That would be a ripe banana. Which is interesting because Osiris, the Egyptian god, is depicted as green, as is the pagan icon known as the Green Man, which is a deity of nature and rebirth, and depicted with vegetation sprouting from its face and its body, which often turns up in the sculptures of old churches. Lots of this kind of thing turning up in Rosslyn Chapel, I beg your pardon. And of course, this evolved into Robin Goodfellow, as you can see, a nature deity or sprite, which became known as the character of Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and then evolved further literature into Robin Hood, and of course the Archangel Gabriel, who's also always depicted in green. And then El-Qadir, which is the Arabic figure that a mystical figure described in the Quran as a servant of God possessing great wisdom and knowledge, often depicted on a fish, of course he is, and a halo surrounding his head, always dressed in green. And Al-Qadir gives name to Al-Qadi, which means a contract, and Al-Qaeda, which is a CIA-funded terrorist group. Sell. All right. Now, here's another basket. We're going back to the baskets here. Sell references a basket made of twigs, especially for bread. All right. Very interesting. Sal also conforms with the Latin root for salt, right? Very easy to see. Sal fits into the word salt. Now, salt, it's quite a common everyday thing and quite a specific thing. You can't mistake salt for anything else. So let's get into why the salt is important. And for those who have been following my work for a number of years, know I always talk about the covenant of salt. And here is why the covenant of salt plays into this. I beg your pardon. Salt is a symbol of the divine covenant or contract of the angelic or dragon bloodline's dominion over earth. All right? Get that. Salt is a symbol of the divine covenant. Salt is a symbol of the contract. We're talking about the contract. This is what I'm referencing. The covenant, the contract, the symbol of dominion over earth by the gods, the dragons, the Anunnaki, the angels, the jinn, whoever you want to call them, the reptilians, the Chitauri. Anyway, another word for salt. We spoke earlier about Malak. Obviously, Malak is the Hebrew for angel or messenger. Melech, meaning ruler. But look, when you mix them around, the E and the A. So for the E from Melech and the A from Malak, you get the word salt. So that's why the word salt starts to become important. But the allegory goes further, and we'll show you why. The covenant of salt. All right, everybody knows what's going on with Zionists wanting to recreate the state of Israel. And this is what it says in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 13, verse 5. It says this: "Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt?" That is important, people, okay? By a covenant of salt. So if you look at what we've been talking about, what the covenant of salt is, dominion over man, all right? Now you understand, if you had to go and read this on its own without having gone through what the salt allegories are, all right? If you actually had to read this in the Bible, you wouldn't know what they're talking about, a covenant of salt, you know? You think maybe they'd misspelled it, meant to say a cup of salt. Because that's what they have the tendency to do, is mistranslate and misspell things in the Bible. In fact, none of the scribes that actually did any of the copying of the original biblical text actually had the ability to read. All they did was copy the symbols. They didn't know what the symbols said. So lots of deliberate mistranslations and misinterpretations, but this is what the covenant of salt is. It basically is the original covenant which gives certain people the belief that they have a right to genocidally murder Palestinians to reclaim the Holy Land of Israel. Okay, it's by a covenant of salt. It's by the covenant of the dragons, by the covenant of the angels, the covenant of their dominion over earth, of our enslavement, of the conflict and the contract, the covenant of war. Anyway, the sacred mother. Don't get too distracted by the picture, folks. The word salt is indicative of saltus, which refers to female genitalia, okay, evidencing impregnation of the sacred or holy mother or matriarch. How is it that they have come to control us, okay? By infiltrating into our culture, by putting rulers and royalty in place to uphold the laws and rules, the elite, okay? And this has been done through, well, we'll get into it. The matriarch mother Ma, all right? Matriarch mother Ma. I used to call my mom Ma, okay? So this is the words we're looking at here. And Ma compares with mare, all right, which is Latin for sea or ocean, which of course seas and oceans are synonymous with salt, because salt water, all right, is obviously, you talk about getting sea salt. I use sea salt out of my grinder, but salt water is where people get sea salt from. But the word salis Okay, you talk about a saline solution, comes from this root word salus, meaning salt water, is etymologically cognizant with sails. In fact, you just have to move the I before the L and you've got sails, indicative of boat, ship, or ferry. Again, the contract. This is why salt is so important. On every level, it ties in the covenant of salt. Etymologically, you look at it, it ties into so many different things. This is why we talk about the covenant of salt. The covenant of salt references the sacred union between the dragon and human mother to produce the Theotokos, or the offspring of the gods or the dragon, who were referenced as being hemithoi, meaning half god or dragon, or the demigods, and whom were given dominion over humanity. Okay? And of course, this is Sobek and Isis, what looks like it could be. But the whole concept of the mother goddess and the baby, I mean, look, this is Horus with a serpent on his head, okay? We've got the dragon. This is from the Ube culture, found on one of the graves, the baby dragon sucking off the mother. And here we've got Isis. And this is how, obviously, they hid over years what these beings were, that they weren't dragons, but represented with a snake on the head, okay? This is what's really hiding behind this face over here, because, of course, they had the ability to shapeshift. But it's the same representation. Okay, talking about the impregnation of the Holy Mother, the Mother Goddess, the Whore of Babylon. Okay. So, talking about Egyptian dragonology or mythology, we go on to the sort of primordial god of ancient Egypt, being Amun-Ra. And the name Amun is interesting because it means the concealed one. And it brings us on to our next step of understanding dragonology. Amun obviously gave root to the term Amen. The expression Amen is used at the end of all prayers just about and all major religions. In fact, Amen is a reference to the god Amun, and Amen means secret. What's very interesting is the very last word in the Bible is what? Amen, meaning secret. So you read the whole thing and you get to the end and the last word is secret. So there's still secrets to learn, you see. It's telling you. They're not hiding these facts from you. They're saying you got to dig deeper. So the Amorites, an interesting group of people that came out of Babylon, are said to be the worshippers of Amun, okay, also known as the Amori. Now, the whole concept of sex being tied into ritual is evident here because the evolution of the term Amori to the French interpretation references passion or love, okay, which is indicative of the practice of ritual sex performed as part of the rituals dedicated to Amun. And in Babylon, the worship of Amun and the Amorite cult were actually the founders of the first dynasty in Babylon. Okay, and this is ruins of Babylon which are uncovered, and you can see some of the dragons that they have carved onto the walls here. Okay, but yeah, 1900s, ruins of Babylon. Hammurabi, interesting. Hammurabi was the first king of Babylon, installed by these guys, the first dynasty, who were all worshippers of the cult of Amun. Okay, Hammurabi, okay, installed the code of law, the first code of law, which came out of Babylon, okay, which is known as the Code of Hammurabi. And this was used to govern over man. And the Babylonian business code has been in effect ever since, turning us into tradable entities that they can vampire off. Anyway, law of the gods. The Code of Hammurabi was given to Hammurabi by the sun god Shamash. Here's a depiction of Shamash, which you can see with wings on him, okay, and horns, giving the Code of Hammurabi to Hammurabi. Interesting. So much like Moses was given the code of law by the gods on Mount Sinai, same thing here. The symbol of Shamash, okay, the symbol representing Shamash is very similar to many other solar deities, okay, and the Babylonian culture pretty much came before all others and was kind of sort of parallel, synchronous at the time of the Egyptian culture. Zoroaster, obviously, which came after the Babylonian culture. Now have a look at this. See the symbol we've got here? Very similar to the one you see in the Zoroastrian culture, which is Persia. All right, we spoke about Persia quite a bit. That's Zoroasterism, and Zoroaster, obviously the deity of Zoroasterism. And then, of course, the winged solar deities repeat themselves through various cultures all over the world. You keep seeing this kind of thing coming up all over the show, like a disc with wings. Sometimes they've got a being in them. Here we go again, Mesopotamia. This is a cylinder seal printed onto a clay tablet, rolled across. You see winged beings here again. And what do we have here? A solar disc with wings and a little being in it. But we have them turning up more iconized again here in ancient Egypt as a solar disc, which is very, very interesting with wings. So this symbol has kind of evolved over time and turns up in all these depictions of solar deities. And this guy here, Shamash, gave the first code of law to Hammurabi. As you can see, he's got wings on. So this is where our laws come from. We all say all the laws come, Babylon, that's the root of all the evil. And yeah, it was, because that's where the first codes of law came out of, the first control over humanity, first structures of society and civilization, the first time we were told to cook and prepare and eat meat and engage in religion and all that kind of thing. Anyway, and all of this was propagated by what's become known as the Western priesthood, okay? Amun obviously being the god of the Egyptians, Zeus being the god of the Greeks, Jupiter, the god of the Romans, and St. Peter being the patron of the Roman Catholic Church. St. Peter obviously coming from Jupiter. Zeus evolved, Jupiter evolved from Zeus, and Zeus evolved from Amun. Okay, these are all the same principal deity, just through different cultures and different religions, which are ultimately all basing their practices on the same ritualistic practices, just changing the words over time so that people think it's an epic rebranding. This is how you wipe out history. You change the words. How you rewrite history is by changing the words, changing the names, changing the labels. Think about it. If you don't want people to know who you are, you change your name. This is how it's done. Very simple logic. Anyway, the Western priesthood. The rabbi, okay, is related to the Syrian Arabic word rayab, meaning the setting of the sun, or Rabi, meaning west. Now, what's interesting, and I do want to take us back here to this name Hammurabi, because it is actually meaning the rabbis of Amun, right? That's what Hammurabi means. Rabbi is rabbi. Think of a Jewish rabbi of Amun. And rabbi is basically another word for priest. So that's what Hammurabi is, a priest of Amun. Okay. So here, the word rabbi is related to the Syrian Arabic word rayab, meaning the setting of the sun, which happens in the west, and Rabi meaning west. And of course, the west, the death of the sun. Okay, that's what it's seen as in religion symbolically. But we talk about the death cult. In Sumerian language, Martu means west, but in the Persian language, Mart means death. In the Latin language, Mort means death. So you can see through the etymology that this is a death cult. This, what we pointed out, Amun, Jupiter, Zeus, right down to Roman Catholicism, it's all about being a death cult. They worship as part of a death cult, okay? And this is symbolically represented by the sun setting in the west, the death of the sun. The sun setting in the west, the setting of the sun is played out in Egyptian mythology as the death of the sun, and it's quite a big deal. In fact, they have a very interesting sort of allegory that goes on, which talks about when Horus is victorious, he rises in the morning, and then he fights a battle with Set all day. Set, and we talk about Set, sun set. So this is Set, the god which basically is the god of night, so to speak. And they supposedly are constantly fighting a battle, Horus and Set. And they fight a battle, and Horus loses, and the sun dies at night and is reborn again in the morning. And then at night it dies and is reborn. And this is the whole rebirth of the sun and the rebirth of Jesus, who was the sun god as well. That's where that whole concept comes from. But it's the birth and the death of the sun is very, very important. Okay. And they worshipped, obviously, it was a death cult. So the West is indicative of the death of the sun, which is why they have this sort of ubiquitous duality story going on, where these two entities, dark and light, are constantly at war. One of them is always winning, one of them is always losing, but it's never the same and is constantly up and down. And this is also symptomatic of life, which is a constant ebb and flow of moving between 2 points. You're never on top and you're never at the bottom, but you're always kind of moving between them, learning and growing and evolving. And this is the allegory that's played out in the Egyptian mystery religions, where they very much had to believe in the balancing of light and dark. Of course, the sun god Horus is the Egyptian sort of solar deity, which is of huge significance and is commonly represented with the features of a peregrine falcon. The peregrine, of course, having the black piece of hooks back like this behind the eye. That is the distinctive marking of the peregrine falcon. If a Horus bird does not have this in, it is not the correct and accurate marking or representation of a Horus bird or peregrine falcon. Anyway, the peregrine falcon is what we use to represent the Horus because, and you just need to look again, the etymology, para, dragon root word, grin, dragon root word. Again, when I say this, when there's two roots, they're important. So there's two roots in this particular bird's root, and that's why they use the peregrine falcon as a representative of Horus. Anyway, the theme of war and conflict is pervasive in the tales attributed to the conflict between Horus and Set, being the manifestation of the ubiquitous duality as represented by dark and light, or yin and yang, or male and female, or positive and negative, or black and white, hot and cold, red and blue. It's the same principle. And of course, the Egyptian religion were very big on acknowledging the balance and the fundamental principle that both are necessary for each other. Think about it this way. Would you ever appreciate daylight if you didn't know night? Would you appreciate night if you didn't know day? You need both. You need to sleep. You need to get up during the day, or some people work during the day or sleep during the day and get up at night. But either way, we have evolved with this functionality of you finding purpose within both dark and light. And this was an acknowledgement of the Egyptian mystery religions. Now, what modern day religion has done is basically taught us to look at the dark as unimportant, to push it over there and only focus on that which they tell you is the light, but is a false light. Instead of accepting and appreciating that all things serve its purpose and that even the darkness is anchored here perhaps to evolve humanity. And on that note, we'll go on to the next point, which is war, all right? Dark and light. Obviously, the darker side of that would be war. The sacred covenant or covenant of salt is a contract of conflict and destruction. All right. Humanity, we didn't really have the kinds of things known as war until the dragon entities sort of messing with us and manipulating us and giving us different religions and languages and telling us to die in the name of country and belief. It's all an illusion and all a construct that they've put upon us. It's all artificially created. Okay, it's been quite a lot to take in for the first episode of season 2. But if you have missed anything at all, please go check out season 1 of Dragonology. And that is all available in high definition to download from effiemark.com. All of our broadcasts are available to check out on our broadcast guide. You can see when they're all scheduled in. Dragonology is going to be jumping around. We're not going to be fixed in this 9 o'clock slot on Wednesday. We most likely will be moving around quite a bit. So please, guys, keep an eye on the broadcast guide to find out when the next episodes of Dragonology will be. Obviously, it takes quite a bit of money to run the Conscious Consumer Network support network that we have for the alternative media. If you guys can in any way help contribute towards the cost of running this network, it is $60,000 a year to keep this network running, which is only a fraction of the cost of what it would cost for a mainstream media channel to run. In fact, that's what they burn through in a couple of hours on production. So we do a pretty good job of running an entire network with over 25 different broadcasters in multiple languages from all over the world, bringing great and empowering information. Please, guys, do donate to our Network Support Fund. Help us keep this network on the air so that we can actually have a platform like this to put out shows like Dragonology. And, of course, for all the details, please go to consciousconsumernetwork.tv, which is our official website, and check out all the details there. As always, we thank you for being with us, and we will see you next week. That's all from me, Mel V. Until then, take care.
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live streamed. Catch up on this or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN high-definition downloads. You can now purchase a high-definition download of your favorite CCN show from ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high-definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows, which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN on the air, public funding is needed. Please donate to CCN's Network Support Fund or become a monthly pledger. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.